Episode 3 of Moon Knight is now streaming on Disney+. This is the one I've been waiting for you guys to be able to see. So, let's talk all the spoilers. Having made the trip to Egypt, Mark makes it his mission to track down Harrow before he finds Amit's tomb, but Steven keeps on getting in the way as they struggle for control of the body they share. But before I properly start with my spoiler review of episode 3 of Moon Knight, I want you to let me know your thoughts on it in the comments below. Share your theories for the next episode so I can feature you in next week's review. And of course, if you love movies and TV, this is the place to be, so consider clicking that subscribe button so you don't miss any future conversation on your favorite movies and TV. And in case you don't know, we talk Moon Knight every single week over here. There's a review for episode 2 right now on the channel, a review for episode 1, and I did a spoiler-free review for all 4 episodes I watched early, so make sure you go check those out and join the conversation every week. And my review for The Northman just came out. I hope you go check that out. But now it's time to talk Moon Knight and all the glorious things that this episode had to give us, because this is my favorite episode. We've come to that midpoint. This show, to me, just keeps getting better, maintaining that precise, intricate feature film kind of pacing to it, where it just keeps on building upon what came before in a really fascinating way. And this episode, once again, changes and shifts the dynamic of how it moves and how it unfolds. This is the first episode to be directed by Benson and Moorhead, the directors of Synchronic, which is a fabulous film, and you can tell by the way the episode moves. Their weird camera angles throughout this are fascinating, particularly when Steven and Mark fall or succumb to the other one to take over the body. It's really interesting. And the beginning of the episode starts off with Layla getting a fake passport to go to Egypt, which is really interesting because the episode is not really hers. If anything, I would describe this episode as a Mark and Harrow focused episode, as to me the biggest takeaway on this one is how they are two sides of the same coin. But to me, how the episode begins really shifts it and really shows you how different it is from the other 2 episodes. Where the first 2 episodes of Moon Knight were this horror mystery diving slowly into the DID of Stephen Grant and exploring a little bit of Egyptian mythology, this is an action adventure with that Jason Bourne Fight Club kind of element to it as we start the episode, and it's just Mark going after fools, kicking their ass, but then Stephen keeps on getting in his way. Mark keeps succumbing and Steve keeps succumbing onto him, and they just find themselves in these weird positions where he's about to kick the ass off of this kid, but then Steven takes over, and then when Mark comes back, he wakes up in a cab and he has to constantly go back to find where these kids are, which is a very different perspective from what we got in episode 1, where it was Steve falling asleep and waking up in different places. Now it's Mark doing that. So while episode 2 really puts us on Steven's position, on Steven's side rather, as it shows Mark as this very bad guy, this very anti-hero kind of person who is very morally gray, this episode shows us that Mark is kind of exactly in the same situation as Steven is, where they keep on getting in each other's way. They keep on getting in each other's life. But the first big takeaway of this episode comes when Mark takes over once more, and there's just a knife stuck on this kid's stomach, and he dies, but Steven claims he didn't do it. And that's very interesting, because it's easy to believe Steven, because Steven is not the guy who do that. If it was the other way around, if it was Mark, it would be easy to doubt him, but I think Steven didn't do it, and I think this is our first clue. I know a lot of people saw it last week, but I don't agree. I think this is our first clue at Jake Lockley. You know, as you guys know, I have seen episode 4. Not gonna get into what happens there, but I think they are very much building towards Jake Lockley in this show, and I think they can create a very interesting dynamic of the good being Stephen Grant, the bad being Mark Spector, who's this mercenary, but he has remorse, he has a conscience. And then Jake Lockley can be the ugly in that trifecta, which I think will be very interesting. And I think Jake Lockley could be the person that Khonshu was actually after. I think Jake Lockley could be the person that Khonshu wanted to be his avatar, but he mainly got Mark Spector, which I think is good enough because he can exploit his vulnerability, which is Layla, as we found out in the previous episode. And so now that they lose track of where the Harrow could be, Khonshu takes Mark to this Council of the Gods, to this tribunal, for him to plead his case against Harrow in one of my favorite scenes of the show, and also the scene that shows that this episode is very much focused on who Harrow is and what the dynamic is between Mark Spector and Arthur Harrow. And what is so compelling about Arthur Harrow as a villain is that in this whole tribunal thing, when the gods are there to judge him or Mark, the way he exploits what he knows about Mark and Stephen and Khonshu and the mental condition that Mark suffers from is that he never tells the truth. He really only exploits what he knows and the actual suffering that Khonshu is putting Mark through. He is himself exploiting this condition, this vulnerability that Mark has. To the point where it doesn't feel like Harrow has anything in particular against Mark or Stephen. His fight is against Khonshu. It's almost like he's defending Mark in this situation, which is so interesting as they meet all the other avatars and the gods start speaking through them, and you have Oscar Isaac yelling every time he's supposed to be Khonshu. This whole discussion here is fascinating to me because it really shows Khonshu at the center of these two characters and how both of them have been made to suffer because of him. Mark and Khonshu get in this position where the gods are now watching them, and whatever move they make to try and supposedly stop Harrow, they can't. Because unlike Harrow, the gods don't prejudge before anyone commits any sins or crimes or evil doings, and so Harrow gets to escape free because he never lies. He merely outsmarts this guy and uses his own vulnerability against himself, and that's really compelling. That's not a villainous person. This is a guy who sees himself, portrays himself, and acts all around like this patron saint of goodness, which he really believes he is. To have the supposed villain of a story expose the mental abuse, really, that an ally to our protagonist is putting him through, that just shifts perspectives in a very compelling way and really positions us to look at characters in different ways than what we did before. And that's what this show, I find, is constantly doing, which is why it's so engaging to watch. And so after the tribunal, because the gods are now onto him, Mark and Khonshu have to be very careful about how they operate and how they go about their mission. One of the other avatars tells him this little piece of information that here in the middle, I don't think the episode does the best job structurally at getting us from one point to the next, because after this it's Mark searching for a certain sarcophagus, but then Layla suddenly shows up just finding him in the middle of Cairo, which they address but still feels kind of a weak reasoning. But so they head on to this friend of hers place and we meet Midnight Man, played by the late Gaspard Ulliel, which the show pays a tribute to at the end with In the Memory of. And so he's a former friend of Layla's. He procures the sarcophagus for the interested parties to take a look at. And I find it really interesting that as Mark and Layla begin working together, even though Mark is trying to escape her, we start to see more layers about Mark and Stephen's relationship, where they started this episode getting in each other's way, not working together at all. But through the course of this episode, not only do they start working together, they begin to see what the other one brings to the table. And through Layla, we begin to see Mark realizing the things he has lost, realizing what this whole adventure with becoming the avatar of Khonshu has actually cost him, despite him doing it for a very good reason, to protect his love interests. And Steven himself starts to fall in love with what Mark has, believing kind of that is his own life, despite being the other personalities. That's all very interesting. That's all very complex, and I think the way Oscar Isaac plays the perspective of both of these characters, and the way May Calamawy injects herself into the story, her performance is delicate, and it's kind of really beautiful to see this kind of twisted love story occurring. But it's here, finding the sarcophagus, that Mark and Steven begin to help each other, and Mark begins using Steven's expertise in Egyptian mythology and iconography and just history in general to do what they have to do with the sarcophagus. But then when Harrow comes in and everything goes wrong and Midnight Man just throws his troops at Moon Knight, we see Steven granting control to Mark, and he does the heavy lifting, becoming Moon Knight, kicking ass. At one point, Steven even wants to do it himself, because he wanted to arrange the pieces of the sarcophagus to find the clues, but then he just starts being speared through, and then he's like, "Ah, take over, take over, take over!" And it's really funny, this dynamic, now that it was allowed to breathe, and we understand the position of Mr. Knight and who that personality is, and Moon Knight, that's very interesting. We get to see Moon Knight kicking ass, being his violent self, being his brutal self, but he's fighting for something now, because Layla now is in danger. And she kicks ass herself in this episode, which is really cool as well. But we begin to see the heart of Mark Spector. He's not a good man, but he has a conscience. And so after this really cool action sequence and kicking Midnight Man's ass, which I'm not really sure what they're going to do with this character given the tragic passing of the actor, but it leads us into the third act of the episode, which they have the clue and they need to find a tomb, but they gotta have the sky look the exact way it did the last time the tomb was found, and it felt a little bit like a Deus Ex Machina kind of power. I mean, Khonshu is a god, so probably isn't. And then Khonshu working with Steven as Mr. Knight, they have this really amazing sequence where they turn the sky back and you see the world rotating and everyone can see it, even the gods can see it, and Khonshu knows this, but he still helps Steven and Mark and Layla find where the tomb is, or find necessary directions to go to where the tomb is. And so they turn the sky back, they see the constellations and all that, and then Khonshu is in prison in this little figurine. And we end this midpoint episode, really, we come to the midpoint of the show where the stakes have been drastically raised, the character's perspective have shifted, and now we changed our purpose. Now our heroes know where to go, but what made them powerful, what made them able to be the hero, is now gone. So now it's Mark and Steven stripped naked of what helped them so far in the journey. And the episode ends with this really great moment between Harrow and the little statue of Khonshu, where Harrow admits that he took joy in the violence that he unleashed in the name of Khonshu, and now he seeks redemption. This whole thing that he's doing, the whole unleashing Ammit from a tomb and all, it's redemption for him. That's very compelling. I don't think we've ever seen a villain going through at least what he understands as a redemption arc. That's fascinating what they're doing with this character, as he blames Khonshu for what he is now. Khonshu is the one that forged this person that sees himself as the patron saint of peace and wants to eliminate evil from the world, and he sees Khonshu as this evil that he needs to vanquish. It's one of the best portrayals of an antagonist I have seen in anything in the MCU, and in this year, by far, probably my favorite. Moon Knight Episode 3 not only shifts the sands of time, but it shifts our perspective on these characters and our understanding of them once more. Who is good? Who is bad? We explore more of the gray morality present in all of them. It delivers some great action still. It dives deeper into the Egyptian mythology and iconography that is so present in the show, and it really illustrates what the show has been selling itself as: Indiana Jones meets Fight Club. That is all present in this episode, and it's all very focused on how similar its villain and antagonist are, creating for this very intense relationship that is converging in extremely compelling ways for both sides. And that's why it's probably my favorite episode, even though episode 4 is the most mind-blowing, I will admit. But that's only next week. And those are my thoughts on Moon Knight episode 3. I want to know what you thought of this episode. I want to know your theories for next week to be featured in that review. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you to my channel members Bruna and Stuart for making this video possible. And of course, next week we'll be back to talk more Moon Knight as we do every week. And I cannot wait to talk about that one with you guys. So until the next one, love each other and love the movies.